I'm an 82-year-old French-Canadian from Saint Jerome, Quebec, and I have an American story I want you to hear. October 2008, I received a phone call from the U.S. It was my son Christopher Hunick, whom I had not seen in 18 years. I had not heard a word from him. I talked to him for a while, and then I asked him, I said, "Christopher, how's your brother Tristan doing?" He said, "Dad, Tristan has been in the mental institution for years now. He tried to kill his mom. He was arrested on an attempted murder charge, went to court, and he was found incompetent, and they committed him to Chattahoochee." I wrote to Tristan every week. Until 2013, he was released again. And he went back to his mother's house determined to kill her. This time using a metal rod. Christopher walked in, but he walked in too late. She already had a broken collarbone. Christopher tells me she was all broken up and disfigured. Months in rehab. Of course, he was arrested again, charged with attempted murder, taken to court, found incompetent to stand trial, and this time he was committed to Gainesville Forensic Hospital, where I wrote to him every Sunday and sent him a few dollars every month for his canteen. Until just lately, I received 3 letters back. He had been released again. A judge sent him to a halfway house, and I called the halfway house, but he was not there. They had kicked him out. He was too much trouble, they said. They kicked him on the street with no medication, no follow-up, no money, no food, no shelter, no friends, all by himself on the street. Then one night I got a phone call telling me that a man named Pat had my son. I was given the phone number, and I called Pat. I said, "I hear you have my son Tristan." He says, "I sure do." He says, "I'm feeding him right now. But," he says, "I won't be able to do it very long. I can't afford it. If you send me $100 a week, I will keep him and I will feed him for you." I said, "The money will be sent this afternoon by Western Union, and I'm sending you an extra $100 so you can give it to Tristan, where you can have the pleasure of spending a few dollars." He says, "I will do that." The next day I called Pat and I said, "Pat, how's Tristan doing? Did you give him the money?" He says, "I sure did." But he says, it didn't last long. Somebody took it from him. You see, my son was born with a mental handicap. He was diagnosed as schizoaffective bipolar at a very early age. And he's very, very vulnerable. He's a big guy, but in prison or on the street or in the hospital, he won't fight back. They broke his nose not long ago. Somebody wanted to take his tray, his food. And believe me, I don't know what to do with him. But you probably wonder, why would he want to kill his mom? He wants to kill his mom because he blames her for losing his dad. He blames his mom for forcing him, along with Prosecutor Patrick Canaan and the HRS, the ladies from the social services, convinced him to testify against his dad. And him and his brother, they were 7 and 10 at the time, both of them testified against me. I was found guilty, and I was sentenced to 20 years to the Florida State Prison. Now, I told you I had a story I want you to hear. But before I tell you the story, I need to give you a little bit of information of past history. It will help you understand what took place in this story. In the spring of '72, while I was serving a 2-year sentence for an escape from the Percy County Jail, Having only 3 months left to serve before being released on the street, I decided I didn't want to be released on the street because I feared for my life. I didn't fear the criminal element, but I feared the local police who at the time, they had a license to kill in the 60s. And I didn't want to push my luck, so I decided to escape again. So on the 2nd of April, when all the entire population, the inmate population and most of the guards were sitting in the auditorium waiting to view an X-rated movie, a skin flick, my partner Freddie Berthelot and I were also sitting there waiting for the lights to go off, but to escape, not to view the movie. And when the lights went off, we were gone. When the lights came back on, the LeClaire institution were short of 2 inmates. I entered the United States illegally under the alias of Robert Dusablon. I ended up in St-Augustine, Florida, where I met a young lady named Maya Hunick. A year later, we were married at the St. Petersburg courthouse. Her sister, Lyra Hunick, was our witness. February 1974, my wife and I decided to move to Onalaska, Texas, to start a construction company. We built our first home in Yopanko, then bought some property on Lake Livingston, and built a couple houses. We were doing pretty good. After 7 years of marriage, on the 4th of July 1980, our first boy was born at the Houston hospital, but he was born blue, a real blue, and I didn't think they could save him, but they did, but I knew there was going to be a price to pay for that. In 1981, after building houses for 5 years on Lake Livingston, we decided to move back to Florida. So we boarded our sailboat with our 8-month-old baby boy and headed for Fort Myers, Florida. In 1983, on the 2nd of February, our second boy was born at the Fort Myers Hospital. He was born a healthy baby and he was named Christopher Hunick. In 1986, my wife and I decided to separate. I told my wife, Maya, I'm going to keep the new boat we just bought, the 41-foot sports fishing boat. I'm going to continue living on it, and I'm going to build you a house on Volano Beach for the boys. And she was very happy with that. 1 month after the house was finished, the house was sold, and my wife disappeared with my 2 boys. And for 3 years, I never heard a word from them. I sat on the same boat at the same marina for 3 years, waiting and hoping. Then one night, while I was packing because I had just sold my boat, I got a phone call from North Carolina. It was the boy's aunt, Lyra Hunick. She said to me, Bob, I need your help. I fear for your boy's life, Tristan. I've reported my sister's boyfriend, David Rice, for sexually molesting your boy, for beating him and sexually molesting your boy, for beating my sister and putting a gun to her head in front of the boys. And nothing happens. They come over, they talk a lot, but David Rice is free to do whatever he wants. But you need to come and help me and get your boy out of here because he's losing. He can't even go to school anymore. I said, Lyra, I'll be on my way. Tomorrow morning, I'll be leaving. I made it to North Carolina, and I finally found their house. I pulled up in the front of their house, the little shack in the middle of the mountain, and they were all sitting on the porch. And I said, Maya, how are you? She says, okay. I said, do you mind if I take the boys roller skating, and then after that I'll take them for a nice seafood dinner at the Dolphin restaurant? I said, you know how much they love seafood. She said, they're going to love that. When the boys heard that, they ran to the car and piled in without saying a word. We made it to the roller skate, and we sat there, while we're having a break, I was trying to question the boys, trying to find out what was going on with David Rice. But they were not ready to talk, and I didn't want to push the issue. So we went and had a good meal, and then I took them back home. And I told their mother, I said, Maya, do you mind if I come back tomorrow? The boys are so happy, they'd love it. She says, sure. The next morning, I picked up my boys, and we stayed out all day. We were roller skating. We went to the restaurant. And while we were roller skating, we took a break, and I looked at Tristan's face. And I said, Tristan, what's wrong? Did you fall down or something? There was a little bit of blood coming on the corner of his mouth. He looked down, but he didn't say anything. I said, Tristan, what happened? Come on, man, tell me. I'm your father. Remember me? I'm your buddy. He wouldn't talk. But Christopher kicked, and he says, Dad, last night when you took us back, he said, Tristan was so excited. He sat in his rocking chair, and he kept rocking away, beating on the arm all the time. It's the same thing. I want my dad. I want my dad. And David Rice got tired of that, and he says, shut the fuck up. Tristan kept going. I want my dad. David got up. Christopher says he punched him right out of the chair, knocked him to the floor, and kicked him in the face with his cowboy boots. I said, come on, man. Tristan, is that true? Yep, that's true. When I heard that, I couldn't wait to take him back home and report the incident. So I took them back home, and I told their mother, I said, Maya, is it okay for tomorrow again? She said, sure. So I went straight to the school principal, Sandra Hunter, and I said to the principal, I said, Miss Hunter, do you know what's going on at the Rice residence? I said, there's something going on, but do you know? She says, I don't know what's going on. There is something going on, but the mother keeps telling me that everything is okay. So last week when she came with Tristan, I told the mother, I said, I want to speak to Tristan by himself, in a room by himself. So Sandra Hunter said to me, I questioned Tristan about David Rice and the sexual abuse, but Tristan didn't want to say anything. He said, Miss Hunter, I can't tell you, but he does some terrible things to me, and I'm scared to death. When I heard that, I left the school principal, and I went to my car, and I took my cellular phone, and I called the DSS, and I called the state police, and I reported David Rice for beating and sexually molesting my boy. And I called the DSS also and told them the same thing, and both of them wanted to talk to me. That's when I realized I had made a mistake, because I can't afford to get mixed up with these agencies. Anyway, I went back to their house, and when I arrived, David Rice came from the porch to meet me at my car. I barely had time to get out of the car. And he was screaming at me. And he was coming at me, and he went for his gun. And as he got close to me, he raised his gun to my face. And I knew I was going to get shot. And I said to him, I said, shoot, you piece of shit. But the second, he froze a second, and I took his gun away from him. And it fell on my foot. This coward backed up, looked at me, looked at the gun, and he went back to the porch. Then I told him, I said to myself, boy, you're a smart. I came here to help my boys. And now I have to leave because I can't afford to stay behind and be questioned by these agencies. Because if I get arrested, I can't help my boys. So I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to go back to Florida. I said goodbye to the boys, got into my car, and as I was driving, I thought, I wonder if Maya, my ex-wife, told David Rice about me, because she knew everything about me. So I decided not to take a chance. I decided to go to Charleston, South Carolina, where I got me a motor sailor, a Morgan motor sailor center cockpit. I moved aboard at the city marina, and I decided to wait for the outcome of this investigation because I knew that David Rice had to go to jail. Beaten and sexually molesting a child, beaten the mother, putting a gun to her head, putting a gun to my face and making death threat. Definitely he had to go to jail. So I'm going to sit back and wait. And I waited. And I was working Hurricane Hugo, and one night I got a phone call from Lyra Hunick from North Carolina. She says, "Bob, now you can see the boys." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, she says, "The DSS ordered Maya to leave the Rice residence with the boys and to go back to Florida." So she gave me their address and their phone number. I called Maya and I talked with the boys for quite a while, and then I decided to drive to St-Augustine right away to go see my boys. Oh, we talked, and the boys were so happy to have their father back. We made plans, and I told my boys that I would be back every 2 weeks because I had some heavy work to do at the Hurricane Hugo. And 1 month, well, on my birthday, before my birthday, I called my ex-wife and I said, "Maya, do you mind taking the boys to McDonald's tomorrow on the 20th of October? I want the boys to celebrate my birthday with you and the boys, and I'll meet you at McDonald's at 11 o'clock. And I'm sending you a little bit of money so you can give it to them to buy me a gift. That'll make them feel good." She says, "Okay." The next day I drove to St. Augustine. I walked into McDonald's. There was nobody there, not a soul. One person behind the counter. I bought a coffee and I sat down. And before I could even touch my cup with my lips, the SWAT team rushed in and surrounded my table with their firearms. And the leader came up to me and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Mr. Sunderland." I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Is your name Gerard Fife?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Stand up." I stood up. They handcuffed me and they took me to the county jail. While in the car, they gave me a charging document for my arrest. I was being charged on 2 counts of lewd acts committed on my boat in 1985. As soon as I get to the county jail, I look for a telephone and I call my boys, and we talked for a long time. Finally, the mother came on the phone and she said to me, "Bob, I know how bad you want to talk to the boys. I know how bad they want to talk to you. But please do not call here again because I stand to lose the boys. I've been warned by Prosecutor Patrick Canaan and the HRS ladies that if I allow the boys to communicate with their father in any way, shape, or form, letters, visits, telephone, I stand to lose the boys if I allow you to communicate with them. So please, for a while, don't call, okay?" I said, "Maya, I won't call for a while." The next day, I had a visit. It was my old drinking buddy from the Scarlett O'Hara days, Olin Meredith of the Olin Meredith law firm. He said to me, he said, "Bob," he says, "boy, you got a mess, huh?" I said, "I sure do." He says, "What do you plan on doing?" I said, "Well, Olin, what do you think?" He says, "Don't do that." He says, "I'm telling you, I'm giving you a piece of advice. Plead guilty and get the hell out of Florida. Because if you don't, if you fight it, you're going to lose. And if you think you're going to go on appeal, all your appeals are going to go in the waste paper basket. Nothing's going to go through, and you're not going to win anything. Don't forget, you're dealing with the most powerful judge in the South, R.O. Watson." I said, "Well, Olin, I would rather die than plead guilty of sexually molesting my boys. I'm going to fight it. That's all there is to it." He said, "I'm going to send you an attorney, the best attorney from Daytona. The next day, an attorney walked into the room, and he was all business. He had his briefcase in his hand. He didn't even have time to sit down. He said to me, he said, I want you to know that it's going to cost you $100,000 for me to represent you. And I'm going to need for you to deposit $100,000 in escrow in the bank to pay for all the expenses, such like investigators, psychologists, psychiatrists, and you name it. I said, sir, thank you very much, but no thank you. And he left. He didn't stay. He didn't even stay 2 minutes. Then, the next day, I had another visit. It was Prosecutor Patrick Canaan. He said to me the same question, what are you going to do? What are you planning on doing? I said, what do you think? I said, you know I didn't abuse my boys. You know that David Rice abused them. And I'm sure not going to plead guilty to something when I haven't done anything. And if you don't believe me, give me a polygraph test. That should settle the issue. He says to me, he says, we don't need to. We got the goods on you. We got everything to send you away for a long time. I said, give me a polygraph. He says, no, we won't. Well, I said, if you won't give me a polygraph, I'm going to call Walter Bilbrough, the attorney Walter Bilbrough from Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm going to tell him to go get my investigator, Michael McCrimmon, and I'm going to ask him to come down here and bring me the most reliable polygraph operator in Florida. He says, if you want to spend the money, go ahead. And I said, well, I will. A week later, my investigator showed up with a polygraph expert. And he was not allowed in the room, so they took me in a room and they strapped me up to their machine. And for about 10-15 minutes, Canaan was standing behind the man watching the machine. And he said to him, he said, hey, stop that, stop it, that's it, that's all. This man is fucking with us, he says. I said, wait a minute. I said, I paid for this test. He says, no, he says, you're trying to, you're messing with us. You must have a tack in your shoe or something. I said, Mr. Canaan, I paid for this test and I want it. And I'm going to take my shoes off, my socks, my shorts, my pants, my shirt, and I'm going to take everything you want. But you're going to give me that test. He says, go ahead, sit down. I sat back down, naked, and they gave me the test. And when it was over, I said, now, are you happy? He says, that's no good. He says, it's inconclusive. I said, inconclusive? I said, I guess I'll be seeing you in court. He said, that's it. Not long after that, I had another visit. This visit came 2 days before my trial. It was Patrick Canaan again. He said, I hear that you filed a lot of motions and petitions and you're requesting the full discovery of the investigation in North Carolina. I said, I am. He said, well, I got it here for you. He had an envelope, a brown envelope, and he gave it to me. I opened the envelope and there was 4 pieces of paper in there, 4 sheets of paper, unsigned, no date, and I read it, nothing concerning the trial in North Carolina, just small talk. But on page 1, on the first page, at the top of the page, there was a paragraph that stated that David Rice had gone investigation concerning sexual abuse on my boy. That was good enough for me. And he left. Now he pretends that that was the full discovery, when in fact he had already received from North Carolina the full 34-page DSS report written by Mandy Stone, who had ordered Becky Young to come to Florida with the report so she could testify against me. Because you see, on this report, she stated that concerning the violence concerning David Rice, he was violent. He had a bad temper. but he was going to need therapy. He was going to need a counseling. And concerning the sexual abuse of the boys, David Rice had nothing to do with that. It was the boy's father. And the DSS requested from the state attorney from Florida, from John Tanner, on her report on page 34, it stated that we are requesting that the state of Florida issue a warrant for the arrest of Gerard Fife, the boy's father, who between 1985 and 1986 had committed a lewd act on his two boys. And that was on page 34, that you can find in the files at the courthouse, the entire report, 34 pages. But very important on this report, look at page 14. Page 14, you will see that my boys, Christopher, is refusing to accuse me. So is Tristan, but Christopher is crying. No, they're hounding him. The DSS lady is pressuring him. She says, Maya, you're the mother. Look at him. He's not ready to testify. And he said, no, my father's a good man. No, don't believe anybody that tells you different. The DSS lady said to Maya Hunick, the boy's mother, Miss Hunick, that's on page 14 now, I'm not inventing that. Miss Hunick, as you can see, Christopher is not ready to testify in a court of law. He doesn't want to testify against his dad. And it's up to you to convince him. Do you understand that? Now, concerning Tristan, they didn't have to worry about Tristan anymore, because the only way they could probably figure a way to clear David Rice of the allegations made by Tristan Hunick, the three ladies, Becca Young, Judy McDaniel, and Mandy Stone, they all recommended that my boy Tristan be placed in a psychiatric hospital for a long-term evaluation. Now that was the report. And the lady, Becca Young, was on her way, all expenses paid, to come and testify against me for the state of Florida. A lady that I have never seen in my life was accusing me. You see, I always wondered, who the hell accused me? My boys didn't want to accuse me. The mother never accused me. Somebody had to accuse me. Now, to prove that the boys never accused me, the boys were deposed 1 month after my arrest. The boys were deposed by the CPT. And there's two cassette recording, 2 cassettes of 1 hour each, that the CPT made of my 2 boys. Now this investigation, or this deposition of the boys, was not done according to the law, one-on-one, so the boys would not be intimidated by anybody else. It was done in their office with a room full of people, so full they were standing in the hallway, according to a friend of my wife and I, Lieutenant Jim Cannon. He says, boy, he says, they were all waiting and expecting something big. But he says, there was nothing. The boys, they don't want to accuse you. And that's what they had to go to trial. They had nothing except the deposition or the request from the DSS North Carolina lady, Mandy Stone, that I had abused my boys. And now I got to go to trial. And tomorrow is the trial. So what happened just before the end of the day, I had another visitor, and this one was important, really important. It was John Tanner's, State Attorney John Tanner's, the #1 investigator, state investigator, Joe Lero. He came to my cell. He says, by God, he says, what have you done to these people? I said, what are you talking about? He says, I just came back from North Carolina. And he says, I know you didn't do anything to the boys. And he says, I know who did. I'm going to talk to the judge because I don't like what's going on. And that was the end of his visit. I was glad to hear this man. And the next day, the 12th of April, was my trial. Now, I'm going to take a glass of water and I'm going to tell you the story that I promised you. It's quite a story. This is the story that I wanted you to hear. It's a short summary of a trial by ambush orchestrated by Prosecutor Patrick Canaan under Florida State Attorney John Tanner at the St. Johns County Courthouse in St. Augustine, Florida. The courtroom at the time was known in the 90s as being the most corrupt court system in the state of Florida. My trial started on the 12th of April. I walked into the courtroom and I had nothing at all prepared for this trial, because for 6 months while I was waiting for the trial, I had filed numerous requests for discovery, such as the school records in North Carolina and Florida, the medical files, the psychological evaluation, everything that normally is needed for a trial in the case of child abuse. But they refused to give me anything. I had nothing. I walked up to the judge and I said, "Your Honor, last night I called North Carolina. I called my witnesses and none of them have been subpoenaed as I had requested from the state attorney's office. Mr. Fife, if you had an attorney, your witnesses would be here this morning. You're going to have to live with it." Now, this decision is on page 917 of the transcript at the courthouse. So I asked the judge, I said, "Your Honor, I'm asking the court to appoint a co-counsel to help me. Mr. Fife, your request for co-counsel is denied." Now that's on page 919. Of course, in an honest courtroom with an honest judge who follows the rules and the law, it's clear that I have a constitutional right to have an attorney if I need one. And the law goes as far as saying that the judge must, at every important stage of the trial, renew his offer of counsel. Judge Watson did not renew anything. He just flatly refused it from the beginning. Now there was a state witness, paid witness, that came from North Carolina with all expenses paid. It was Becky Young, the lady who had written the report concerning the allegations of sexual abuse by David Rice on my son, which she had cleared totally of all wrongdoing in her 34-page report. This same lady who had accused me, without even knowing me, on this 34-page report requesting that I be arrested for having committed a lewd act on my boys in St. Augustine, was now on the stand. And I went over and I asked her a question. I said, "Miss Becky Young, can you tell the jury what type of questions concerning sexual abuse by David Rice on my son Tristan Eunuch did you ask him?" She looked at me and she said, "Okay." I said, "Miss Becky Young, please tell the jury what type of questioning that you did with David Rice." "Okay." That's on page 626 of the transcript. I asked her one more time, "Miss Becky Young, tell the jury what kind of an investigation you conducted concerning the sexual allegations on my boy." "I didn't." "Okay." "You didn't?" "No, I didn't." "Why not?" "Because I didn't have to." "And why not?" "Because there was never any allegations of sexual abuse filed against David Rice in North Carolina." Now her response is on page 627 of the transcript. So I asked her, I told the judge, I said, "Your Honor," I said, "you know, and the prosecutors know, that she's a perjured witness. You have the report. You know that she conducted the investigation, and you know that she cleared David Rice. Move on, Mr. Fife, move on." Maya Eunuch was on the stand for the state, and I asked her, I said, "Miss Eunuch, can you tell the jury the meeting, describe the meeting that you had with the school principal, Sandra Hunter, concerning your boyfriend and the sexual abuse of my boy, Tristan Unick. Her response on page 787 was, I have never had a meeting with school principal Sandra Hunter concerning my boyfriend and my son, Tristan Unick. I said, Your Honor, you and the prosecutors know that she's lying. You received a letter from school principal Sandra Hunter, 2 letters that she wrote to you, and the prosecutors have a copy, I have a copy, and you have the original. Mr. Fife, move on, move on. The state of Florida called Tristan Unick to the stand, and Prosecutor Patrick Canaan asked Tristan, can you remember, do you remember what your father did to you in a boat? Can you tell the jury what happened? He says, I sure will. He said, my father got me to like to drink vodka. He says, one night we went to the store, the liquor store across the street from our boat, and he bought a big bottle of vodka, and when we came back he gave me a shot of vodka. And it went down hard, but the second one, it wasn't so bad. He says, I got so dizzy I couldn't see straight, so I laid on my bed, and my father screwed me in the butt. I wanted to crack up laughing watching the 3 prosecutors, the panic. They didn't expect that. They expected a lewd act, you know. And I was watching him, and I said to myself, my God, I said, that's it for the trial, it's over. Because you see, I was charged with a lewd act. And now the accusations were capital sexual battery. Now that's punishable by life. A lewd act is punishable by maximum 2 years and $2,000 fine, if ever it gets to that point. But now they had a problem, a big problem. So anyway, I said to the prosecutor, I said, can I ask Tristan one question before? I want to hear what his brother's got to say, but I just want to ask him one question. He said, go ahead. I said, Tristan, I know that you have a hell of a good memory. I know that. And I said, I wonder if you remember the day we left Texas on our sailboat on the 1st of April 1981 when we left. You were 8 months old. Do you remember that? I sure do. Tell the jury. He said, my father had installed a swing on the ceiling, and he said, I sat there every day. And he says, I was always dressed with Oshkosh by gosh. And he said, I watched all the big fish my father and mother were catching. And most of all, he said, I remember the 3 languages my father was teaching me, French, English, and Spanish. I just wanted to show the jury. I stopped it there. I didn't want to push it any further. I figured they should have enough. They should realize that this boy is, you know, he's whatever. So I told him, I said, that's all for the question right now, but I told the judge, I said, I reserve the right to continue questioning my boy. I want it noted. He says, it's noted. So they called Christopher Unick on the stand. And when Christopher, the testimony of Tristan can be found at page 865, 66, 67. And like I said, there was only one word, screwed in the butt. No other allegations of sexual abuse. Now is the time for Christopher to testify. And Prosecutor Canaan said to Christopher, Christopher, can you tell the jury, do you remember what your father did to you on the boat between 1985 and 1986? He says, I sure do. He said, what did he do to you? He said, he screwed me in the butt. There was panic. I mean, I was watching the 3 prosecutors. It was so funny. I couldn't believe what was going on because they had a big problem. And And he said he screwed me in the butt. Now his testimony is on page 945 to 954. And the thing is, when the prosecutor, Patrick Canaan, prepared the documentation for the trial, he used a document which was sworn by Assistant State Attorney Malcolm Anthony on the 7th of November 1990. And he had supplied the information for the arrest document to charge me with and to arrest me with. And this document was not allegations made by somebody against me for having molested my boys. It was, count one was word for word the wording that the North Carolina ladies had dictated to Patrick Canaan when they requested that I be arrested for having abused my boys. And on count two, that was for Christopher. And Patrick Canaan, in order to win what he was after, had to fabricate evidence on a sworn document, on this sworn document. And on this document, he claims that my son was 3 to 4 years of age at the time that I abused him on the boat, when in fact my son was born February 2nd, 1983. On January 1st, 1985 and December 31st, 1986, my son was not even 2 years old. So in this document it states very clearly that Christopher Unick, a child under the age of 16, to wit, of the age of between 3 and 4 years of age, by touching and fondling the genital areas of the said Christopher Unick in a lewd and lascivious and indecent manner, but without committing the crime of sexual battery. Now watch the problem they got now. But without committing the crime of sexual battery. And this is a sworn statement now. But yet, he's accusing me of committing the crime of sexual battery. I don't know if you understand the problem they had. Now that testimony is on page 945 to 54. And I was enjoying watching the prosecutors because I knew I had a new trial, because when a prosecutor fabricates evidence on a sworn document, normally in normal courtroom, this can't go on. But this is St-Augustine, Florida. And in St-Augustine, everything goes. But by then, I asked Christopher one question. Just one question. I said, Christopher, you know how much I love you. He says, Dad, he says, you don't know what love is. He says, David Rice does. That was it. Now the court was adjourned because they had to regroup, and it was postponed for the next day. The next day I walked into the courtroom, and I was facing the judge, and he looked at me with a big grin on his face. He said, Mr. Fife, this is your day. This is your defense. Call your next witness. I said, I call Christopher Unick. Judge Watson said to the guard, go get Tristan upstairs. Before Tristan could walk into the courtroom, the three prosecutors, like a jack-in-the-box, they sprung up and they said, Your Honor, you cannot let this boy come here in this courtroom. He's already been damaged, traumatized. He said, yesterday, this boy has suffered enough. You can't let this boy be further traumatized by his dad. Judge Watson looked at me and he said, Mr. Fife, he says, I'm sorry, but I cannot allow your boy to come down and stand here to be questioned by you and being further victimized. You've done enough. I've heard enough. Move on. Call your next witness. No, Your Honor. No, sir. I'm accused of abusing my boys, and I have a constitutional right to defend myself. You must forget about the 6 and the 14. I have a constitutional right. I need to prove my innocence, and the only way I can do it is by cross-examining the witnesses. But you won't let me. No, I won't let you. Your Honor, I need to cross-examine my boy. Now, this argument took place. It lasted for quite a while. on page 11, 24, 25, 26, 29. This went on for quite a while. And finally, he said, Mr. Fife, move on, move on. I had one witness that I was counting on, because my witnesses in North Carolina, I had no witnesses. All I have is the state attorney's investigator for the state of Florida, the investigator for the state of Florida, Joe Laro, who had come to my cell telling me that he had gone to North Carolina and reassured me. He says, I know you didn't touch your boys. He says, but I know who did. I'm going to talk to the judge because I don't like what's going on. So I called him as a witness. And when I said, I'm calling Joe Laro, Judge Watson said, Mr. Laro, on the stand. As Joe Laro was walking across the floor to make it to the stand, he didn't even have time to make it there. He said to Mr. Laro, he said, Mr. Laro, what are you going to testify to? I looked at the judge and I said, Your Honor, he's my witness. Can't you wait till he answers, or wait to rule on my question or something? I said, he's my witness and I need to ask him questions. Please let him testify. No, Mr. Fife, he will not testify. Out, Mr. Laro, out. That was it for my witnesses. There was no more witnesses to be heard. Now, I had the videotapes, 2 videotapes that clearly shows that I had never abused my children, because they refused to accuse me from the very beginning. I said, Your Honor, I need to show the videotapes to the jury. Mr. Fife, we can't do that because the tapes are not good enough. They're not clear enough, and we're not going to waste time with these videos. I said, Your Honor, they're my videos. They were done by the Child Protective Team. It was good enough for them, and it's good enough for the jury. Please let me show the videotapes. No, man, we argued so much. You can check the transcript. The arguing went on for quite a while. And finally, he agreed, and he said, bring the screen in. They put in the tape, and it started the videotapes. And I was watching it, the judge was watching it, and the jury was watching it. And 15, 20 minutes after it started, Judge Watson jumped up from his bench and made a beehive for the screen, and he shut it off, and he says, that's enough of this. And I mean, he made it so fast, his cape was flowing behind him like Batman. He didn't want the jury to hear something that he noticed. I said, Your Honor, you got to turn this thing on. And we argued and argued. And he finally turned it on. But it was lost to the jury with all this argument with the judge. It was unreal. He turned it on, and he shut it off 2 more times. And again, the argument, let the tape play, Your Honor. And he let it roll to the end. When the tape was finished, there was nothing else left that I could do. I had nothing to defend myself with. Now it was the closing argument, and I knew I was going to get a new trial, so I wasn't too worried. And Judge Watson said to Patrick Canaan, the prosecutor, he said, Mr. Canaan, make it fast. Do you hear me? And he was mean. I said, make it fast. I'm telling you now, 3 minutes, Mr. Canaan, 3 minutes. And he went like this, 3 minutes. Do you hear me? Yes, Your Honor. Patrick Canaan stood in the front of the jury, and he said to the jury, he says, members of the jury, it is offensive to hear Mr. Fife stand here in the front of you telling you that he is not the man that abuses children, that it is somebody else, that it is David Rice. This man is lying to you. Like the old saying goes, as the twig bends, so goes the branch. These boys are messed up, and the reason they're messed up is because of their father. Gerard Fife is a con man, and he is conning you. He's a manipulator, manipulating you. And that was the end of his closing argument, which didn't last 3 minutes. Now it was my turn, but I didn't even worry about making a closing argument, because what can I argue with? I can't cross-examine, I can't have witness, I can't have evidence. So I said to the jury, I said, members of the jury, I know I'm a good father, and I know that David Rice has abused my boys, but now it's up to you. And that's it. That was it. And within 2 hours, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. The sentence was scheduled for the 15th of April, 1991. And while I was standing in a courtroom facing the judge, he said to me, he said, Mr. Fife, on count 1 of the lewd act, he says, I sentence you to 15 years to the Florida State Prison. And he says, that's count 2. I don't believe it was a full act. I believe it was an attempted lewd act. And he says, I sentence you to 5 years additional. Now that's 20 years to the Florida State Prison. Now, if you wonder how the judge got such a big sentence, it's because Patrick Canaan again, this sociopath who was determined to nail me to the cross, fabricated evidence again. Because you see, in the 90s, a judge, before a judge could render a sentence, he needed to have a guideline score sheet drafted by the prosecutors, which meant they had to tally up all the convictions that a convicted defendant had, and add up all the points, and when the points, whatever they came up to, the points determined the type of sentence. And on this sworn document, sworn by Patrick Canaan, which is sworn at the bottom, the judge was entitled to give me from 12 to 27 years based on the calculation of Patrick Canaan. Now, Patrick Canaan fabricated, the only thing he could fabricate to get me a big sentence was by adding on the charges that I had been convicted in Canada the word violence. He added this, larceny with violence. And that's why the judge, he was basing his sentence on what Prosecutor Canaan gave him. But this is a sworn statement that is fabricated evidence. So what I did, again, it's St-Augustine. There's not much you can do. So I filed a motion to correct the legal sentence. At least I could shave off a few years, because by taking off this fabricated evidence that he had here, violence, I would knock off 15 years off the 20 that I had. So I wrote, of course, the motion to correct the legal sentence was denied. Like everything else I filed, it was denied. So I filed a request from the state attorney in Canada, asking the clerk of the court to communicate with Patrick Canaan and send him the document to prove that I was not convicted of a crime with violence, that I was convicted one time of a crime of theft, theft, but no violence. And I had asked him to send the document, a court document, to Patrick Canaan. And the document which he sent me, which he sent to the court, is the document that clearly states that Gerard Fife pled guilty to a simple theft. The Crown accepts the plea of the accused. The sentence for the 23rd of April, 1965, on simple theft. The accused was sentenced to 2 years by Judge Omer Cote at the time, 1965. Now, with this here, with the newfound evidence, I filed again another motion to correct the legal sentence with all the documentation to prove that he had used fabricated evidence to get me the sentence of 20 years. Of course, my motion to correct the legal sentence with the documentation to support my position, it was denied, like everything else, like Olin Meredith. My visit that I had, this lawyer told me, he says, they're going to deny everything you do and it's going to go in the trash can. Well, he denied it. And again, I was stuck with my sentence, 20 years. Of course, I filed habeas corpus up the wazoo. I filed for 3 years. Everything was denied. And on the 4th of July, 4th of September 1993, everything was canceled because my plea, my appeals were per curiam affirmed, which meant I had reached the end of the road and there was nothing else I could do. All I had to do now is go serve my time, working at the law library as a jailhouse lawyer. When I got to the Florida State Prison, when I was in St-Augustine, I didn't want to call my boys because my wife had told me, please don't call, because Patrick Canaan threatened me that he was going to take my kids away if I allow you to communicate with the boys. So now I felt that since I'm at the Florida State Prison, I'm going to call my boys because David Rice is, Patrick Canaan is out of the question. So I dialed the number, and before I could talk to my boys, a guard came behind me. You see, the switchboard must have had a red flag on my calling my boys, and they told me to put my hands on my back, and they handcuffed me, and they took me downstairs to the hole, to segregation. I was locked up in a little cell there waiting to go on court, to go to court the next day for the violation that I had committed, but I didn't know what it was. So when I was facing this judge, guard, and a few guards around like a jury, I was accused of having violated an order, and I was sentenced to 30 days in the hole with 30 days gain time loss. I did my 30 days, and when I came out, I called my boys again because I never thought for a second that it had anything to do with my boys. Again, I was put in the hole for 30 days, but this time I said, wait a minute, something is wrong here. What the hell? What am I violating? They said, you're going to have to talk to the director. So I had an interview with the director, and I asked him, I said, what is the order that I'm violating? I don't even know about it. He says, this is an order from the state attorney's office, from Patrick Canaan, stating that you are not to talk or to communicate in any way, shape, or form with your boys. Because he claims that when the boys hear my voice, it traumatized them. He says, you cannot call the boys, period. For 10 solid years, 10 solid years, I was never allowed to call my boys once. Not once. Never had a visit, never had a letter, never had any communication with my boys. While I was at the Florida State Prison, since I couldn't call my boys and I couldn't write to my boys, I decided it was important for me to reassure my boy Tristan that I loved him and I was there for him. But I didn't know how to do it, so I decided, since I can't call him, I can't write, I'm going to put an ad in the paper. So I wrote to the director of the newspaper, The Record, and I asked him how much it would cost me to put an ad in his local newspaper for 6 months. Once a week for 6 months. And I gave him the ad that I wanted. The ad was, to Tristan and Christopher Hunick, I love you and I miss you so much, your dad. That was the ad that I wanted posted. The ad appeared, and when the ad appeared, Maya Hunick, the boy's mother, of course, she had to call the state attorney's office because she was warned, if your husband, if the boy's father ever tried to communicate with the boys, you better notify us, otherwise we're going to take your boys. So she panicked and she wrote a letter to Prosecutor Patrick Canaan concerning the ad. And Patrick Canaan responded in a letter. These 2 letters are on file at the courthouse in St. Augustine, Florida. His response was, Miss Hunick, we know about the ad, but rest assured that this ad will never appear again. I have sent an assistant state attorney to meet with the director of the newspaper to make sure that he stops these ads. Sure enough, a week later I received a letter from the editor of the newspaper, And the letter stated that, Mr. Fife, we are returning your money, your check, and your ads have been canceled. That's it. That's all. Now, there was nothing I could do. And for 10 years, I I was able to communicate with my boys. Now, you probably wonder why I'm coming with this story. Well, my son was released from the mental institution not long ago. And I had made a deal with this guy to give him $100 a week to pay for his food and his keep. And I ran out of money. I'm totally flat broke. I have no more savings because fighting the system in Florida for 10 years, that takes a lot of money. And I was out. And I didn't know what to do to raise money. I'm too old to work. I'm too old to rob a bank. I figured that a lot of people sell their stories. And I thought, hell, I have a good story. Maybe I can make enough money to pay for my boys' plane ticket and have them transferred here and pay for their passport and have enough money to rent a little old house in the woods where he wants to raise dogs. So I decided I was going to tell you the story, hoping that somebody might be interested in this story. Now, if anybody's interested, please do it fast, because I want to get my boys off the street. Because I know that Tristan, my mentally handicapped boy, I worry, but I can't do a thing. I can't even send him $100 to spend money on whatever he wants. I don't have any more money. I'm flat broke, and my old age pension is only $1,500 a month. After I paid my rent, after I pay the food, after I pay the gas for my old car, there's not much left. So I'm hoping that somebody might be interested in it. And also, my boy Christopher was locked up last week. You see, Christopher and Tristan, they've never had a job. They don't have a license. They don't have a debit card like everybody. They keep getting job. Christopher keeps getting job, and every time he gets a little bit of money ahead, he is so happy. He celebrates with his buddies, and he loses his job because he celebrates too much. And it's always the same thing over and over again. Back in jail for stupid things. No, he's not a thief, he's not a drug dealer, but he gets into trouble with his temper. So anyway, he's asking me, he says, Dad, he says, you need to find me somebody, a law firm that will take this case, because he says, I feel that Patrick Canaan has destroyed our life. You, myself, and my mom. He says, he's destroyed all of us, and he needs to pay for this. And I believe that they owe me some money so I can live normally. So if you find a law firm, please let me know, because I'm anxious to hear about it. Now, if there's a law firm out there that wants to take this case, I know what they charge, around 40%. I will give you 75%. I'll sign all the papers, because we don't need big money. I'm 83 years old in a couple of days. I don't need the money for myself. And the money from a lawsuit will take years. But if a law firm wants to take this case, I'll give you 75%. And let me know. I don't think you'll have a hard time winning this case. And if you take this case, because of all what went on in this courtroom, the fraud and the fabricated evidence and the alteration of evidence, of withholding evidence, there's enough for the big dollars. I don't want the big dollars. You go get it. But please let me know if you're interested. And that's about all I want to tell you. I'm just hoping that somebody will buy my story, because I'm so anxious to help my boys. Please, I need help.